Hey, Dustin Tibbetts here, financial advisor with Jazz Wealth Managers. Hope you're having a good day. We're going to try something a little different today. This came from a customer, right? And I thought it'd be a great FinTip series to do for you. Customer says, should I have international funds in my 401k, 403b, workplace plans, things like that? Does it even make sense to have, because I noticed they're not performing very well? Could you check it out? And if you find out that they're not really that great to have, where else should I put that money? So today what we're going to do is actually go back to the scan that we did in the Dave Ramsey funds. You may know that Dave Ramsey has a suggestion of the 4 different types of funds, and of course international is one of them. So I'm going to use that scan because that's a familiar one with you guys, and we're going to take a look and see what we can find out. Okay. The other thing we're going to do is ask the question, if they are, performing well and we should keep them. Okay, that's great. But if not, can we make an argument for something else? So we'll dive into it here, and I hope you happen to learn something as we go. So first thing I'm going to do is go over to the funds. So you may remember from our Dave Ramsey video there, we actually covered the international funds, and we did a quick scan. So I didn't change a whole lot in this scan. There are 65,846 mutual funds out there. That's a lot. We then said, okay, it's got to be an actual mutual fund here in the States that we can participate in, and we want that mutual fund to tell us that they are an international fund. I do not want to make the decision if they're an international fund. That would be up to me to fudge the numbers, so I don't want that. I want the prospectus to actually tell me they're an international fund. That's 641 names. We then said, hey, it's got to be around for a while. Got to be at least 20 years old. Should be older, would be better, but at least 20 years for the sake of today's scam. And we got 99 of them. We put some expense ratio things in there as well. We didn't really want the really ridiculous front-loaded funds, although Dave Ramsey's okay with that. We really wanted sort of the best of the best, and we wanted a smaller list, to be honest. So if they had some random things that maybe made them on the border of being international, or they were closed funds or something, we just took them off the list. So we got 54 of them here to take a look at today. All right, first column, years to inception. We don't care about the total returns. We don't care about the expense ratio, but I will highlight that in the data that we show. We wanted to look at the annualized 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year performance. We want to see that if we invested in these over various time periods, if they would in fact have returned either better than their benchmark, which be the international index, or if it would be better off just put the money somewhere else. Let's take a look. So here we go. We've got the, I just plotted them nicely for you. So here's the 5-year data. The black is the actual international fund average, and then the blue is the index, international index, if you were to plot it against that. In other words, kind of like the S&P. Would you be better off buying growth stocks or buying the S&P? This is the same thing, but just for international. You look over the 10-year, you got a better return than the overall index. The average fund did outpace its international index, and over the long term, they tend to do that as well. It's actually not very hard to do that in the international index, and that's because the international index, MSCI, they're not really fair the way that they put the stocks in there. It's not technically accurate, and most people know that. All right, anyways, so here you go. You've got the returns here. You say, okay, well, I get it that they've had a rough stretch over some time here. Average annualized return less than 1%, or a loss of less than 1%. Over the last 10 years, you averaged an annual return of 4.65%. That ain't bad, considering you might have 25% of your portfolio in that, or 20% or something. I'll take that. Over the last 20 years, though, wow, if I hold on to an international mix, not that there's anything wrong with this or Dave Ramsey's suggestions or anything like that, but the question is, if I hold on to that, would my money not have been better off somewhere else? That means 25% of my portfolio is not even outpacing inflation. Is it really helping? Did we have some monster years in there, monster losses? I don't know. I don't like that so much. So what we did is we took it a step further and said, all right, let's plot the S&P on top of it, right? Everybody's going to say, well, why don't you just buy the S&P, man? Okay, well, let's plot the S&P. So I put it kind of in the background there. S&P over the last 5 years has averaged 7.74%, and the last 10 years, 10.78%. It's been a good run, right? This is, I would argue, you should probably go out even further because we just came out of the end of a really strong bull market. Obviously, a great expansion in the economy. You're going to see some big numbers. I just don't know if I would use that as my ultimate decision maker. Over the last 20 years, it gets to be a little bit more realistic, right? 3.74% is the average annualized return for the S&P over the last 20 years. I would argue you should go further if you're going to use this for anything. But here's what we find. You would probably want to just buy the S&P or some other index. Almost every single other index beats the international funds. Did you know that? Almost every single index beats investing in the international funds. So I would almost argue that it may be time to back that allocation down or move on altogether, right? So here's the question. I said, well, if someone invests in the S&P, they're going to, you're diverse. I believe that. You're diverse investing in the S&P. But could we make an argument that you do have international exposure in the S&P? And I asked everybody here because I'm like, look, if I get this wrong, you guys are going to murder me on the YouTube comments there. So what I did is I took it a step further. I had help with this. But what I did is I said, let's take any number of companies. Just give me the top holdings in the S&P. And let's look at what percentage of their revenue comes from overseas and not here in the States. So in other words, Microsoft, for example, we know Microsoft's a global company. Could you not argue that you have some international exposure there? International growth exposure, by the way, if you're going to even highlight that. So here's what we did. This is a little ridiculous, but you guys deserve it, right? You hit the subscribe button. You help me out. So let's take a look. We took the top 25 holdings in the S&P 500, and we looked up, as of the most recent quarter, the percentage of revenue that they get internationally, and the rest would be domestic. So for example, Microsoft. Basically half of their revenue comes from anywhere other than the United States. I'd say that's an international company. Apple, over half. Right? Amazon, over half. Facebook, over half. That's weird. Google, over half. I can understand that. Johnson & Johnson, basically half. In fact, I highlighted in red here any company that would be on the low end. Like, for example, JP Morgan, 23% internationally. All right, if you had a whole portfolio or the S&P was made up a bunch of those, you might say, that's okay, right? It's not great. If they were all made up of Verizons or AT&Ts, you'd say, no, that's not international. Come on, man. Bank of America, 11%, that's not international. But the majority of the top 25 holdings in the S&P as of the first quarter of 2020 get this percentage of their earnings not from the United States, but internationally. So one could technically make the argument that if you chose to just have S&P based funds, even if it was like you had an S&P index fund at work, you had more of a growth oriented fund that included some NASDAQ in there, maybe included some growth stocks that are in the S&P as well, and maybe you had some dividend based stuff that included S&P stocks. All right, if you're mostly based around stocks in the S&P, even though you may have different buckets of them, I'm with you. That's international. That counts. And we now just showed you that you would technically perform better by doing that. So if you rounded off all of your picks in your 401k or whatever to stocks that maybe were growth focused or whatever, but were also in the S&P 500, not bad, right? Anyways, that's all I have for you. I just thought I'd share that with you. I hope that helps you. Something different. We're really data oriented here. We like to focus on giving you specifically the why, helping a customer with specifically what to choose to meet their goals, rather than give you an opinion and just do all this great stuff that other people do. So I hope you'll check us out at Jazz Wealth. I do appreciate you watching there, and have a great rest of your day. I hope you'll hit the subscribe button and all that stuff I'm supposed to ask you for. I forgot to do that. Thank you. Enjoy.
Why should you choose Jazz Wealth as your retirement or long-term investing service? Our portfolios are managed by us, not some faceless mutual fund manager. Our private classes will teach you everything about investing and getting your dough straight. Best of all, our fiduciary standard means your best interest comes before ours.